Hey yo, good evening, and in the words of our good friend Joshua, let's go. Welcome to Dash Sports TV, where we will talk all things Cal football, in this case, all offense Cal football. I'm Jasper Kenzo Sundin, a reporter at the Daily Californian,
I'm Shailin Singh.
and we are Bear Dash. So, new offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave is going to be leading the Bears offense this year. There's a lot of excitement from Cal fans from the Cal campus. Musgrave is coming out of the NFL. There's a lot of hype to see what he does and what he brings to this Bears offense, which is growing, which has a lot of returning starters. But how will Bill Musgrave's offensive scheme utilize Cal's talent after 17 years in the league? Shailin, can you tell us a little bit about that scheme?
Yeah, so just to preface all this, if you hadn't been following Cal, the offense for the past couple of years has been absolutely atrocious. There's been bright spots, certain games you think of where Cal seemed to have maybe even an above average offense, but then you just look at the stats again, and Cal was dead last in the Pac-12 in points per game with 21.2. That's it. At dead last in yards per game with 328.5. It was not good news for the Bears. That could be attributed a lot to injuries across the offensive line throughout the entire year, and also losing your starting quarterback, Chase Garbers, for half the season did not help by any means. But there's lots of improvement to do if Cal wants to contend in the Pac-12 this season. So Bill Musgrave's job is going to be to come in and utilize Cal's players to the best potential that they can. And like Jasper said, Musgrave has an NFL background, but he was Pac-12 at heart. He played quarterback at Oregon, went to the NFL as a fourth-round draft pick, played quarterback in the league, but didn't really actually play much. One interesting tidbit is he backed up John Elway, Steve Young, and Joe Montana throughout his NFL career. So you know he's going to be taking little bits and pieces from their games, and I'm sure he still implements them in his coaching philosophy to this day. But in the NFL, coaching-wise, spent time with many different teams, but most recently with the Raiders and Broncos. He brought the Raiders offense from dead last, and within a couple years, he had them to top 6 offense in the league. I think they were number 6, and that was the year 2016 where Carr was 3rd in MVP votes. So he is known for his ability to develop quarterbacks and get the most out of them, which is why I believe Chase Garbers is in for a great year.
Absolutely. Yeah, Musgrave, he spent a really long time in the league, as Shaylin talked about. There are some concerns. He's coming back to college. It's been nearly 2 decades since he was in the college game he last coached as an offensive coordinator with Virginia. And he's bounced around a lot in the league. He's been successful. He's had his challenges. So I think that a primary concern for a lot of fans is the adaptation of guys like Chase Garbers and Nico Remigio in this Cal offense to a pro-style scheme that Musgrave will bring through the door. But I think we're anticipating a lot of eagerness. These are guys who want to challenge at the pro level. The guys like Garbers, I mentioned Remigio, the running backs room. These are guys who want to turn pro, and I think they'll be eager to hit the ground running and
one of
hop
those
into a pro-style offense.
Yeah, they're going to be the biggest difference based on the eye test is the pro-style offense. Chase Garbers last season only played under center about 15% of the time, and the vast majority of those plays were on run or play action. But Musgrave is going to have Garbers under center a lot, and Cal's offense just as a whole will look more like an NFL offense. You're not going to see crazy motions. You're not going to see a lot of the stuff that other Pac-12 offenses like to use. Last season under Bo Baldwin, Cal's offense was pretty slow-paced and balanced. Baldwin had a weird thing where he didn't like to give the offense a name. He would never really describe it because his whole thing was that they wanted to be just as diverse as possible, which clearly did not pay dividends. I think it's nice for a team to have an identity and to have a specific style of football that they play. And for Musgrave, that's a West Coast offense. There's going to be a lot of quick passes, a lot of running backs doing inside zone runs, but also catching out of the backfield, which is something that CBJ, Christopher Brown Jr., had some experience with, and he was pretty good at it. He had a couple touchdowns on catches. And it all comes back to Chase Garbers in the end. Just the unique route combinations that Musgrave is going to utilize should open up Garbers for quick passes, which is going to be extremely important for a player that, even though they were kind of freakish injuries, he is, I guess, now considered an injury-prone player. So you want him to be able to get the ball out quickly. You want him to stay upright behind the offensive line as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think a big part of Chase Garber's evolution of his game is more pocket awareness. It was a big difference between his freshman season and his sophomore season. If you can take another step forward with Musgrave, I think we could see him step up more. He'll be injured less. He's going to gain more yards. I think some other players that are really going to benefit are the backup quarterbacks. You have really young guys like Spencer Brash and Jaden Casey, who's a rising freshman, who are probably not going to see as much playing time this year behind Modster and Garbers, but they'll have plenty of time to study that playbook. They'll have plenty of time to get their feet under them with Musgrave. I know Spencer Brash has been working really hard in the offseason. So I wouldn't be surprised to see those guys benefit, if not this year, several years down the line. And again, it's just that pro-style offense, getting a feel for it early on and being able to like grow up and get your feet wet in that system. Another position group I think could really benefit is the running backs. You talked a lot about Garbers, quarterbacks really benefiting. You talked about Carr and Musgrave's pass there, but actually Musgrave's rushing offenses consistently rank better than his passing offenses. In his last decade of coaching, his running backs units have ranked above his passing units in every season except one. On average, he puts forward top 10 rushing units in the NFL. He's willing to spread out carries. He's also willing to go with a clear number one running back. He worked with Adrian Peterson, but even on the Broncos and Raiders, working with guys like Latavius Murray, Phillip Lindsay, and C.J. Anderson, he's able to develop really strong starting running backs. And in 5 of Musgrave's last 7 seasons, the number one back on his team has gone for over 1,000 yards. So I think we could really see guys like CB step up and gain massively, both I think as players and on the field from the backfield.
Yeah, and Musgrave loves those big, bruising running backs, and CBJ is one of those guys. He's got the – I was going to say my opinion, but I'm just going to state it as a fact. CBJ has the nastiest stiff arm in the Pac-12. You can at me. I'll send you some highlights. He'll send defenders flying, and that is what Musgrave loves. Adrian Peterson, you mentioned. His offensive coordinator during his 2,970-yard season, 2,097, where he came within a few yards of breaking the rushing record. Musgrave was his offensive coordinator for the Vikings that season. So even though he is known for his ability to develop quarterbacks, he's going to run the ball a lot, and CBJ is someone who's going to get a lot of those benefits. But speaking of the backs, he is expected to bring back the use of a fullback, which Cal did not have really last season at all. 21 personnel, 2 backs, a fullback, a running back, and a tight end. That's something Musgrave likes to use a lot. Cal's fullback should be Zach Angelillo, who was converted from linebacker, but he's just going to give the offense another dimension. And I think it really helps establish that identity of a physical run-first offense. I think he hasn't said whether it's, really going to be a run-first or pass-first offense, but I think when you have a guy like Christopher Brown Jr., who almost hit 1,000 yards last season, he can go between the tackles and just gain extra yards after contact. Pretty much he's not going to fall backwards. He's going to get you at least 2 to 3 yards, even if he gets stuffed at the line. And I think that a fullback is just going to help lead the way with that, and it's going to make this running offense that much better.
Yeah, we could see some really bruising Cal play. It'll depend a lot on the offensive line, though, which I believe we'll get into a bit later in the segment. Shailin, so we talked a lot about both the quarterbacks and the running backs. Who do you think is going to benefit more if you had to choose one of those position groups? Who's really going to draw strength from Musgrave as the OC?
I mean, I touched on it. I think it's going to be Chase Garbers. We talked in multiple episodes about Garbers having pro NFL potential in the future. And I think playing in an offense like this is just going to help his draft stock even more. And not just his draft stock, I think the Cal offense is going to produce on the field. And one thing that Musgrave loves to emphasize is that he wants to custom engineer the system to fit his players, which a lot of coaches say that, especially offensive coordinators. But then you see them doing things like you see this in the NFL. They'll send a running back out wide to try to, throw off the defense. But if that running back can't run routes or can't really catch, is it really throwing off the defense? Like, you have to engineer the playbook to your specific players. And I think Musgrave doing that with the receivers and the people around Garbers is only going to benefit him more. We talked about Carr's Pro Bowl season. Matt Ryan also had a Pro Bowl season under Musgrave. And Cal, as a university, has a reputation of developing elite NFL quarterbacks. And I think Garbers this season could prove that he's maybe next in line to be one of those players. I'm not saying he's going to be at the Jared Goff or Aaron Rodgers level, but he can do a little bit of everything, and Musgrave's diverse playbook is going to suit him well. Garber says he's already fully comfortable with the scheme and that if they had to go out there tomorrow, he thinks the team would be fine with the playbook, even though they haven't taken any on-field reps really as an entire unit. But I think this is a season where Garbers could potentially emerge as even a top 25 quarterback in the nation. I think Musgrave is going to use him in every way he can. He's not going to take away Garbers' dual threat ability. They're still going to be using some RPOs, play actions, getting Garbers out of the pocket, but those quick passes are where Garbers thrives.
Absolutely. I agree. Just in terms of Musgrave being someone who utilizes talent when he has it. You talked about Adrian Peterson thriving under Musgrave. If you look at his time with the Oakland Raiders, you see the same type of thing with Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. It's difficult to balance really two top-tier wide receivers on your team, but Musgrave did. They both had 1,000-yard-plus seasons at the same time, which is crazy and unheard of. And I think you could really see an opportunity for players to break out as Musgrave utilizes their talents the way they use them. Speaking of wide receivers, though, Cal entered last season with, let's say, less experience and less depth at the wide receiver position. Those players have only grown. There's going to be a bit of a battle for that WR1 slot. The Bears have 4 returning wide receivers who tallied over 200 yards in 2019. But who's going to take the top spot? Who's going to be the top dog in this Cal offense?
Well, that stat might not seem very amusing. It's not the best stat, only 200 yards. There's not really a go-to player, and that's why we're talking about this. In fact, no Cal receivers finished in the top 25 in the Pac-12 in receiving yards in 2019. So it's very much an open race for the Bears, but there are, I would say, 4 or 5 returners who will most likely get the vast majority of the snaps. But I think the go-to receiver this upcoming season is Kekoa Crawford. He was a transfer from Michigan, didn't play too much there, went to community college for a bit, and then came to Cal. Last season was his first season with the Bears. And everything hinges around him staying healthy, because when he was healthy, he led the team in yards per game. Remigio led the team in total receiving yards, but when Kekoa Crawford played, he was great. But he missed more games than he played. There was multiple injuries. He got injured in the Ole Miss game, got injured again in the Washington State game. So he only actually ended up starting 4 out of 13 games. But even so, he had 7 receptions of 15-plus yards and 4 receptions of 25-plus yards. So he has the big play potential, but in a bit of a bigger and more well-rounded body than some of these other receivers had. I think he has the best combination of size, speed, and hands on the entire team. And Garbers has shown that he has a strong connection with him. And if he stays fully healthy, Garbers is only going to, build more of that chemistry with him. And I think he has a good shot at ending the season as Cal's #1 receiver.
Yeah, you talked about building chemistry, and I think Kekoa Crawford could really be a breakout candidate. But for me, it's about someone who already has chemistry, who's already built chemistry. We mentioned Nico Remigio multiple times in this podcast, so I'm just going to bring him into the light. He led the Bears in total yards last season behind what can only be called a big, big game. He had 157 yards through the air, a big touchdown late in the game. He and Garbers have come up through this team together. They've been here. The last few years, they've gotten a lot of chances to play together, to work together, to be on the field together. And I think Remigio, A, has the most chemistry with Garbers, and B, has the most breakout potential. I think he needs to polish his game up a little bit. But for me, he led Cal last season without being the number one wide receiver, with spending large parts of the season behind guys like Jordan Duncan and Keikoa Crawford, and he still performed. And I think he needs to find some consistency in his game. But if he can do that, he will be Cal's number one wide receiver because he will be the guy Garbers looks to because he's the guy Garbers knows. And beyond that, he's going to be coming out of the slot. We talked about Musgrave potentially having an offense that goes quickly, that gets the ball out fast, that avoids leaving Garbers in there to get injured. Remigio is going to be the guy you go to. He's going to be the guy Garbers knows best, and he's going to be the guy coming up quick in the slot who Garbers can get to easily. And I think Remigio could really break out. A breakout season would help the Bears as well. He could be here for a couple more years. He could boost his draft stock this season. I think Remigio is going to be the number one receiver on this Cal team.
Yeah, Remigio definitely has a very physical stature, especially for his size. He's only 5'10", but he's got the speed, got the agility. Obviously, he's on punt return, and he will probably continue that this season. But you're right. He has that. Every quarterback needs a good slot receiver, and he has that sort of Jarvis Landry-esque play style where he's a physical receiver, but he can make the contested catches. But also, one thing that Musgrave is really going to try to do in this scheme is free him up for yards after the catch because Remigio can make defenders miss and he can fly. So if you're talking about those quick slants, quick outs, things like that are going to give Remigio even one-on-one opportunities to put a move on a defender, I think he's only going to have a better season than last season, absolutely. And you talked about him potentially having, the biggest breakout chance out of any of these receivers. I'm going to disagree and go with Mekhi Polk. He was a true freshman last season, not really expected to play much, but I think if you have Mekhi Polk and Keikoa Crawford on the outside with Remigio in the slot, that's a very serviceable wide receiver core in the Pac-12. I mean, it's nowhere near somewhere like USC, but it'll get the job done, especially with Garbers. Mekhi Polk is long and wiry. He's 6'3", but he's got blazing speed. He needed to add some weight. That was his biggest downfall, was he just didn't really have the physicality. But did some research, and he was listed at 185 on the fall roster, and he was 195 in the spring roster, which I think came out in like February or March. So that was months ago. He could be into the 200s by now, and I think that's only going to benefit his game. What do you think about Polk?
Absolutely. Polk is a guy who exploded at the end of last year. Like you said, started a little slow, true freshman. You can't blame him, right? It's a new place. It's a new offense. You don't usually see guys like that getting a lot of chances. He had 19 yards total in his first 8 games. He averaged 55 yards in his last 5, including a 105-yard game against Illinois in the Red Box Bowl. So he's been growing last year. I would bet my bottom dollar that he's been growing this offseason, and I would continue to bet that he's going to grow next season. He's a deep threat, and it will really depend on how Musgrave chooses to utilize this offense. But like you said, he's a smart coordinator. He's looked at what he's had in the past, and he's utilized his options to the best of their ability. I think Polk falls in line with that. If Musgrave looks at this guy and says, look, he's a downfield threat, and I'm going to use that, he could absolutely become the number one bomb for the Bears. I could see Garbers going deep to him. We saw Bo Baldwin finally begin to utilize those skills and that speed in the bowl game against Illinois. And if Musgrave can pick up on that and use it, Polk could have an outstanding season.
And not only is he a deep threat, he can utilize his speed on screens, which is something we saw a couple times last season. He took a 52-yard screen to the house against Washington State and made something like 7 defenders miss on that play. Also took a 44-yard screen to the house against UCLA. He's got the speed, he's got the high. Hopefully now he's got the physicality, and that's a connection that Garbers could, if he stays another year, that could be going for 2 years strong. So it's really important that they get Polk involved. The other option on the outside is Trevon Clark, who he was pretty up and down last season. He's the tall physical target, 6'4", more of a possession guy with the ability to make some contested catches. He had 6 receptions for 69 yards against the super stout Oregon secondary. So he can definitely make some plays. He had an extremely tough catch to set up the game-winning drive against Stanford in the big game. And he could maybe take that role that Jordan Duncan had last season, where they're not going to get super high volume, but they can make the tough clutch catches when it matters. Trevon Clark's got to show that he has the route running abilities and consistently create separation. But the guy can make contested catches, and he's definitely going to get a ton of snaps.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would call Trevon Clark Mr. Reliable. He's going to be on your third down situations. You're going to want to have your eyes on Trevon Clark because he's going to be the guy on the outside that Garbers is going to. You mentioned that Stanford game. That was a phenomenal catch that changed the outcome of the big game. We'll see more of that this season. And yeah, maybe not in the same volume, but he'll be Mr. Clutch. He'll be a name to look for and a player to look for when the game gets down to the wire. So we've talked a lot about various aspects of the offense, but let's bring it all together. Cal has struggled in the past. You touched on some of that. The last 2 years, that Justin Wilcox era has really not been, let's say, a high-flying time for Cal football's offense, but that could change. What is Cal's ceiling offensively in 2020?
Yeah, and it's something that Cal fans were not used to at all, coming from the Sonny Dykes era, where the Bears were putting up close to 40 points every game, if not more than that. Granted, they did have guys like Jared Goff and Davis Webb, but now things are different, and they're going to be different again with Musgrave. But, in terms of a ceiling, the best case scenario, I see Cal as maybe being able to get up to that, 4 through 7 range in the Pac-12. But I don't think they're going to compete with any of the elites in the Pac-12. They're not going to get anywhere close to Oregon or USC in terms of points per game or yards per game. And then even teams like Arizona State with Jaden Daniels, they lost a lot of pieces, but they have a lot of touted young guys who are going to come in and do great. You can't expect too much in the first year of an offensive system that literally has not had the chance to prep at all. Like, they had, a few spring camp practices before everything got shut down, and then it's just been watching a ton of film ever since then. They're going to get a bit of time to ready up, but I don't see this offense becoming, all of a sudden averaging 35 points per game. I think they could maybe, probably up their average to like high 20s, maybe 27, 28 points per game. And that'd be enough, with this defense. I would say the potential of the offense is higher, but on the other side of the ball, the defense limits it. You're losing a lot of pieces, which means longer drives for opponents, and they have sort of that bend but don't break mentality. A lot of new players starting on that defense that, they're going to allow some points, allow long drives with field goals. If this was 2018 or 19, when you have the takers causing turnovers left and right, then I would say, okay, maybe this offense can put up 30 points a game. But that's just not going to be the case. And I think that also plays into it.
Look, I think there's a lot of reasons to go slow with Cal, to be cautious. The Bears have been in the basement of the Pac-12 when it comes to the offense for the last couple of seasons. And I think getting into the middle of the pack is a realistic goal, but for me, this could be a top 4 offensive team. And if Cal wants to really challenge, it's going to need to be. You talked about losing pieces on defense, and I don't doubt that those holes are going to be filled. But in a shortened season, you don't have time to mess around. You don't have as much time and leeway to make mistakes and figure things out. The offense is going to have to be there from day one if they want to succeed, and I think they can be for this reason only. All else being equal, lacking injuries, if Chase Garbers can stay healthy, if a lot of the O-line can stay healthy, if you can keep your starting personnel on the field, this offense could be good because they could produce star players. A big problem the last couple of seasons is Cal has not produced, at least in the last couple of years, any real star performers. College offenses run through star players. You look at the top 6 Pac-12 scoring offenses last season, they all had players in the top 5 in either rushing, receiving, or passing yards. Cal had none, right? And you have to go back a couple years to see guys like Chad Henson leading the Pac-12 in receiving yards, Davis Webb and Jared Goff up there in passing yards, to see Cal offenses that succeed. The reality is, for that offense to succeed, you need star players, and Cal hasn't had that, but this season they might. We talked a lot about a lot of those guys, but Remigio could break out. Polk could break out. CBJ will break out. You talked about his stiff arm. He's going to have a great season. He's going to be all on top of it. And Garbers could as well. If these guys break out and have those statistically great seasons where they're leading the offense and putting up yards and points, this could be a top 4 offense, especially because other teams are losing players. I mean, Oregon State could have been great, but they've lost a lot of guys. They've lost Jake Luton and Isaiah Hodgins. I think USC and Oregon will be phenomenal, but Utah's lost a lot of their starting players. Arizona State could be good, but I think Cal could swing with them, especially if Garbers and CBJ step up. And I don't see a lot of other teams in the Pac-12 being able to hang if Cal can really step up and avoid injury.
Yeah, I don't think 4 is in the question. I think they could be good, but for me, it all starts with the offensive line. How well the offense does this season has everything to do with the offensive line, because the line was marred with injuries in 2019. They had 8 different offensive linemen start games in 2020, and that doesn't even include Jennell Williams, who was supposed to start the season at left guard before getting injured before the season. And 3 of those guys who started on the line had never started before. They were just kind of thrown into the fire. Will Craig was another guy, the starting left tackle. His season got ended 2 weeks in. Mike Safell, the starting center, who, he had some NFL draft potential. He missed some games with injury. This team allowed 43 sacks last season and nine in one game against Oregon State. That is just unacceptable. That cannot happen. Cal will be near the bottom in the Pac-12 again if the offensive line cannot gel and stay healthy. But all these guys are fully healthy now. There should be some good competition for those positions. They will be bolstered by Mike Safell at center, Jay Curhan at right tackle, who's played 38 consecutive games. We're talking about all these guys, all these receivers, and CBJ is supposed to have a great season. None of that's going to happen if Chase Garbers doesn't stay protected and CBJ doesn't get running lanes to go through. Because as much as he can create yards after contact, we're gonna need those big chunk plays to be able to win football games. I mean, you measure high impact plays over 15 yards. That all has to do with your offensive line, giving your quarterback time to throw and creating lanes on the ground. And the offensive line is going through some changes. Steve Greatwood, who was, a great offensive line coach, was replaced by Angus McClure. So that's going to be some new chemistry building. But I think everything has to do with the offensive line's health. I mean, to be a hard-nosed, physical team, you need that.
Absolutely. And if you think about last season when Cal was struggling, it was when guys like Garbers were getting injured, and that comes when the offensive line is inexperienced and can't protect them the way they need to. And a lot of this is going to depend on personnel. You look at last season when guys like Duncan and Crawford were getting injured, having trouble getting into the team. McAllen Castles, Cal's starting tight end in 2019, transferred midway through the season. But if they can get some stability, like I said, this is a top 4 offense here. And I know we haven't said that about Cal in a while, but mark your words and check it out. This could be a real team to watch and some real exciting football.
Yeah, and I think as much as I've been talking up Garbers, I think this offense is going to run through Christopher Brown Jr. I think he has the potential to be a top 3 running back in the Pac-12. I think he is top 3 in returning players in terms of yards from 2019. And, he almost hit 1,000 yards last season, and that was, playing half the season with Chase Garbers out when teams did not respect Modster at all. They would just load up the box. They didn't respect the receivers. Everything was just loaded in the box between the hashes to keep CBJ from running wild. And now with the receivers healthy, with Garbers healthy, with the offensive line healthy, they're not going to be able to do that, which is just going to create even more opportunities for CBJ. I think he's in for a huge season, and the offense is going to run through him.
Absolutely. Well, folks, unfortunately, that's all the time we've got this week. If you have any questions that weren't answered, feel free to hit up our Twitters. They're right down here. And you can also find us at Dash Sports TV on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. There's more content at our website, dashsports.tv, and at Sports Pac-12 or Sports Pac-12. I'm sorry, where you can find our host columns. You can also find Shailin and I at thedailycal.org, where we both write and cover football, among other things. In the words of our good friend Justice De Los Santos, stay hydrated out there, stay safe, folks. It's a crazy time to be alive. That's all we've got.